Welcome back. This week we're going to read another section of Sammy Keyes and the Hotel Thief. We're going to read chapters 15 and 16. Chapter 15. Grams knew right away that I'd been up to something. I gave her a hug when I walked in the door and she pulled back. "Where have you been?" I didn't want to say the mall or Hudson's or something because that would have been a lie, so I just said, "Walking around with Marissa." That wasn't a lie, but somehow Grams knew it wasn't the truth either. She put her hands up on her hips. "Walking around where?" All of a sudden, I'm wishing I had gone to Hudson's or to the arcade or to the pet store for that matter. At least I would have had something to say, but I hadn't, so I didn't. I just kind of snapped the loose rubber on one of my high tops with the toe of the other and said, "Well, if you really want to know, I had to talk to Officer Borsch." Grams takes off her glasses and starts huffing and buffing. Very calmly, she says, "About?" I snap the rubber some more. "Oh, you know, the note that was left under Mrs. Graybill's door, the guy at the Heavenly, stuff like that." I look up from my snapping and I can tell she's not buying it. "Really, Grams, that's what I did." She pops those glasses right back on her nose and kind of leans at me. "Young lady, one does not reek of cigarettes after having visited the police. One does not reek of cigarettes after having simply walked around." Her eyes drill through me like little lie detector lasers. "One would, I imagine, reek of cigarettes after one visits the Heavenly Hotel, though." She stares at me a minute while I'm busy tearing up my shoe. "Unless you want to tell me you've taken up smoking." "No, Grams, of course not." Then I blurt out, "How can you still smell it? It's been at least an hour." She gives me a little smile. "Since?" I flop down on the couch and sigh. "Since I went to the Heavenly to ask Gina some questions." Graham's eyebrows pop way above her owl glasses. "Gina?" "You know, the lady who got all that money stolen. And really, Grams, I'm not going back. The place is seedy. You're right, all right? It's seedy." "Well, well, well," she says, "like I told you so. And what made you change your mind?" "The staircase, for one thing." So I tell her about the mirrors, and then I kind of get carried away and tell her about Gina's room and how she shouldn't be too surprised if one of these days she's looking out the window and sees a fireball in 423 across the way. That it would just be Gina's head running around the room looking for a bucket of water. Grams just sits there very quietly listening, but when I get to the part about Officer Borsch yelling at me, she jumps up and says, "Of all the nerve!" She flips through the phone book, muttering, "I'm going to give that obnoxious toad a piece of my mind." "Grams, no. It'll just make things worse. They'll send him over here to talk to you, and I'll be stuck in the closet in the middle of all your shoes." "It doesn't matter, Grams, really. He won't believe you, no matter what you say." She thinks about this, then sighs. "I suppose you're right." We're quiet for a minute, then all of a sudden her eyes light up and she says, "Say, I know," and off she goes to her room. A minute later, she comes crinkling back, carrying plastic bags, saying, "When I was out earlier, I picked up a little surprise for you." Now, you have to understand, Grams doesn't surprise me with anything. There are things I would want, like a new skateboard or a Walkman or even a watch, but I would never ask for them, and I would never expect her to surprise me with one of them. So when she says surprise, my ears perk up like Doritos do when I shake around his box of kibble. "Really?" She sits next to me on the couch. "Just wait until you see this." Well, believe me, I'm doing my best to peek in and do just that. She reaches into one of the bags, and what does she pull out? Wool. Wool and a pair of knitting needles. She says, "Now, I don't expect you to jump up and down for joy. I just expect you to give it a chance." It's good that she wasn't expecting it, because I sure wasn't doing any jumping. "But Grams..." She just shoots me down with her eyes, and before you know it, she's whipping that wool around, her fingers flying in between those clicking needles like mice teasing a crocodile. She says, "This is called casting on." And in no time, she's straightening out a row of stitches, looking very pleased with herself. "Come here," she says. So I scoot a quarter of an inch closer. "Come here," she says again, so I scoot over. She shows me how to knit, and she shows me how to purl, and before you know it, I'm holding those needles, knitting and purling about as fast as a swimmer in mud. After a while, Graham says, "See there? You're doing fine." I just roll my eyes at her. "You wait and see. In a few rows, you won't want to stop." She opens the other bag and pulls out an embroidery project. You know, the kind that's all sealed up in thick plastic with a picture on the front of what you wind up when you're all done. Those pictures aren't really accurate, though, because they never show any blood spots on them. Anyhow, I probably would have just stuck to my swimming in mud and ignored the picture of Graham's project altogether if she hadn't flipped it over so fast. Real fast. Like she didn't want me to see it. I stopped swimming. "What's that?" "Oh, just a project I thought that I'd start on to keep you company." She pulls out the instructions and pushes the picture aside. "Let me see, Grams." She waits a second, then says, "It's just something I decided to make for St. Mary's Bazaar this year." "Well, what is it?" She flips it over and says, "Striking, isn't it?" I'm expecting flowers poking out of a vase like she made last year, but what do I see? A fence post with a pair of cowboy boots resting on it. And since it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that Grams would like, I ask her, "Are you feeling all right?" She laughs. "I'm just tired of doing the same old thing." She goes back to reading the instructions, and after a minute, I go back to tangling wool. And when we've both worked for a while, she sighs and says, "I sure wish we had some of those pecan shortbreads in the house, don't you?" Now you can have pecan shortbreads. They taste like the crumbs from the bottom of a toaster all scrunched together. But Graham's wanting some was all the excuse I needed. I tossed down my needles and said, "So do I. I'll go down to Maynard's and get some." Graham looks at me. "Really?" Then she shakes her head and says, No, it's getting too late. But you can tell she's got her heart set on toaster crumb cookies. I check the clock. "Maynard's will still be open. Really, Grams, I don't mind. But..." "And Mrs. Graybill's probably in for the night, so you don't have to worry about her. I'll be right back." "Okay, we'll have cookies and tea and work on our projects. It'll be fun." TJ was holding the phone with one hand and ringing up a customer with the other, so he was too busy to notice when I walked in. And when I found the shortbreads, I kind of hung out in an aisle and listened while the other customer left. TJ says into the phone, "No, man, I got it covered. As long as I've got it by tomorrow." "That's cool with me. I'll get it to you by the end of next week at the latest." "Yeah, man, later." He lights a cigarette, so I go up and put the cookies on the counter. "Your dad coming back soon?" He blows smoke in my face. "What's it to you?" "Just wondering." "Well, go wonder somewhere else, would you?" he says and gives me my change. "Just looking forward to seeing a friendly face in here." I smile because everyone knows Maynard's the grumpiest guy on earth. Funny, very funny. Now scram. I take the shortbreads and I'm heading home when I decide that it wouldn't hurt to run over to Hudson's and ask him a quick question. So I take a little detour down Cypress Street, and there he is on the porch, watching the world go by. I wave and run up his walkway. "Hi, Hudson. Got a minute?" "Sure, Sammy. What a nice surprise. I was just going to cut into a chocolate cake I baked this afternoon. Care for some?" "I can't. I've really only got a minute." Hudson eyes my cookies. "On an errand?" I nod. I'm supposed to be learning how to knit right now. He laughs. "Knit? You?" He cuts me a piece of cake anyway. "So, what's the burning question?" "I've got two of them. First off, what are pork bellies?" "You're considering investing in pork bellies?" "Hudson, I don't even know what they are. Look, TJ was on the phone the other night talking about pork bellies." He shoves over the piece of cake. "Maynard's, TJ?" "Yeah. He was talking about pork bellies and coffee beans and oranges. He seemed pretty upset, like he'd lost a bunch of money." Hudson shakes his head. "Poor Maynard. That boy is going nowhere fast." "So what are pork bellies?" Hudson cuts himself a piece of cake. Sounds to me like the man is playing the commodities market. Maybe futures, maybe options. Whichever, it's a surefire way to lose a bunch of cash in a hurry. "What do you mean?" "I consider it to be a sucker's game. Option brokers will tell you that you can double your money overnight, and sure, sometimes it happens, but by and large you lose money. With futures, you can lose big money, more than you put in." I take a big bite of cake. "I don't get it." "Okay, let's say your broker calls you up and tells you that the price of, say, silver has never been so low, and that you could make a quick buck by investing in silver options. He tells you that in all of human history, you could never get silver for less, and he's sure that because of some happenings in, let's say, Japan, the price of silver will go through the roof by the end of the week. He tells you that if you invest $5,000 at the present price of silver, when the price skyrockets later that week, you'll be set for life. Then, later that week, when the price of silver drops, he comes back to you and says you've got to invest some more. It's never been this low. It's impossible that it'll go any lower. So you wire him some more money, and pretty soon you've lost your shirt. That sounds like gambling. Hudson nods. Just like gambling. Some people win, most people lose. Wow. So TJ's up to his ears? I think so, and I think it's Maynard's money. Hudson shakes his head. Maynard should have given him the boot years ago. The boy's a leech. So I'm sitting there eating chocolate cake thinking, and my brain's getting all tangled up. Why had the hotel thief looked familiar? Was he wearing a disguise? Was it TJ under all that hair? I tried to put TJ in a beard and bushy wig, but all I came up with was a big maybe. What's troubling you, Sammy? Nothing. Hudson takes a bite of cake. Well then, what was the other question? Oh, right. I was just wondering, how much do you know about the guy who lives in your rental? Bill? Hudson shrugs. He's a little unusual, but I think he's a decent fellow. Rommel seems to like him. What about the purse? The one Rommel found? Yeah. What are you driving at, Sammy? I take a deep breath and say, I bumped into your renter at the mall. He was carrying all these packages. It was about an hour after someone broke into the Heavenly Hotel. Hudson wipes cake crumbs with the back of his fork, and he says, You think Bill's the thief? Well, Officer Borsch says all crimes around here are connected. I mean, what was the purse doing in your trash can anyway? Hudson puts up a hand. Hold on, young lady. First off, we don't know that the purse was in the trash can. Rommel might have found it and just tossed it over the fence. Second, Bill has no need to steal money. He has a well-paid job. Just then Bill comes walking through the gate wearing a windbreaker and baseball cap as usual. He's carrying a briefcase and his nose is pointing straight down, as usual. Hudson calls, Evening, Bill. Bill just pulls his ball cap and grunts, as usual. When he's gone, I whisper, Who would ever want to hire him? Hudson chuckles. Aw, Sammy, that's a good one. Who might you expect would hire a man like Bill Eckert? I don't know, a place that needs an accountant. Hudson throws back his head and laughs. He shoos a moth from his boot and says, My dear, things are not always what they appear. What do you mean? He looks out at the stars. Ever listen to KRQK? Sure. Have any favorite DJs? I shrug. Melissa's crazy about Rockin' Rick. Hudson smiles and hitches a thumb toward his garage. Marissa's crazy about him. My jaw about drops through the porch. You're kidding. He's Rockin' Rick? One and the same. No way. He laughs. Way. That's amazing. I sit there for a minute shaking my head, then I stand up and say, I've got to get home. Grams is probably getting worried. Hudson nods at the cookies. So the lady likes shortbread. He looks at me and smiles. With tea, I suppose. I laugh. Exactly. I'll have to remember that. For the next time she comes over? One of his eyebrows arches up. She told you about that? Nope. I saw you myself, from the roof of the mall. Well, I never. He leans forward and says, Seriously? Seriously. Hudson wraps up a piece of cake and says, Here, give this to your grandmother and tell her I hope she'll stop by again soon. So I run home, and before Grams can say anything about me taking too long, I gave her the piece of cake and say, Hudson says hi, and he hopes she'll stop by again soon. Cake? She starts to take it, then says, You go ahead. I prefer shortbreads. So I had the second piece of cake, and for the rest of the night, Grams made me work on my knitting and purling. And you'd think time would go by real slowly, but it didn't. Knitting makes you think. Your fingers are busy pushing yarn around, and pretty soon your brain starts wandering, looking for something else to do. I thought about Hudson and Rockin' Rick and about things not being what they seem. And I thought about other people I know, like Mrs. Graybill and Officer Borsch, and wondered again why they were the way they were, and if maybe they had secret lives as nice people. I also thought about Gina and TJ and what being them would be like. But after a while, I started thinking about having to go to school the next day and what I was going to do about Heather Acosta. And the more I thought about Heather and her stupid Help Heal Heather fund, the more I wanted to get back to school and straighten things out. Trouble is, I didn't have a clue how. Chapter 16. The minute I got to school, I could tell Heather'd been doing a lot of talking. While I'd been home putting knots in wool, she'd been busy burning up the phone lines, telling everyone what a monster I was. Kids would see me and stop and whisper to their friends, or point and cover their mouths. And since Marissa hadn't shown up yet, I was walking around all by myself, feeling really dumb. Then this brown-haired girl with studs and loops loading down her ears comes up with a couple of friends and says, "Heather happens to be my best friend, and if you ever touch her again..." She looks around a minute thinking, "What? You'll pin me down and machine gun my earlobes?" Just then, Heather shows up. Now, Marissa has told me Heather's nose was taped up, but I guess I wasn't expecting to see what I saw, because I took one look at her and busted up. I mean, she's standing there with 10 hoops in her ears, and she's looking at me over the top of this enormous cast on her nose. It was so big, I wanted to grab a pen and sign it. But all that gauze and tape plastered on her face didn't stop her mouth from working. She gives me the evil eye and says, "Come on, Tanil, let's go before she breaks your nose, too." So Heather and her groupie leave, and I'm just standing there with the feeling that something's not quite right. When Marissa finally shows up, I say, "Didn't your cousin break his nose once?" She parks her bike. "Brandon?" "Yeah, doing a back dive off the edge of our pool, remember?" "Why?" "Did they tape up his nose?" She shakes out her hair. "Yep." I can see Heather at the tables talking to Tanil, and I nod in that direction and say, "Did it look anything like that?" Marissa takes a look. "Wow, it's even bigger than it was yesterday. You must have really nailed her." The bell rings for homeroom, and while we're all standing there mumbling the pledge, my eyes shift over and stare at the mountain of tape on Heather's face. And pretty soon I'm wondering, what's gauze doing on her nose? I mean, if I broke it on the inside. There's no reason to put gauze on the outside unless it's cut, and I know I didn't cut her. Then I start thinking about how the tape on Brandon's nose had been smaller and kind of skin-colored. Heather's nose was buried in athletic tape, the white stuff they wrap your ankle with when you sprain it in sports. Then it hits me. Her nose isn't broken at all. She's just putting on a show to get people to hate me, and it's working. I hadn't missed much, being suspended. Miss Pilson was still talking to herself in Old English, Mr. Tiller was still moving X around the chalkboard, and Mr. Holgartner showed the second half of another video that had more static than socks on polyester pants. And when lunchtime finally rolled around, I still hadn't figured out what I was going to do about Heather. That is, until I heard her in the lunch line, standing a little too close to Danny Urbanski, telling him, "And Dr. Grant says I can't take it off until Friday. It's so embarrassing. He says I really should be home taking it easy, but I just can't afford to miss that much school. That brat Samantha only got suspended for 1 day, and I have to wear this all week. It's so unfair, don't you think?" Marissa whispers, "Brother, don't you just want to pop her in the nose?" I say, and then we both laugh. Marissa won't admit it, but she's had a crush on Danny Urbanski for ages. A major crush. And watching Heather move in on him was steaming her potatoes. She turns to me. "You're right. She's faking it. If only we could prove it." I go digging through my pockets and Marissa asks, "What are you looking for?" "Some change." I pull out a few coins and give her a little smile. "I've got an idea." "What is it?" "I don't know if it'll work, but it's worth a shot. Stay here. I'll be right back." I found a payphone right outside the office and I got lucky. The girl using it was just hanging up. I hunted through the phone book and I found him in the yellow pages. Bertram Grant, MD. By now my heart's beating like crazy, so I take a deep breath, pop in the coins, and say, "Hi, this is Heather Acosta," when someone answers the phone. "I came in a couple days ago with a nosebleed." The receptionist says, "Oh, Heather, yes, I remember. May I speak with Dr. Grant or maybe a nurse?" The doctor is in with a patient right now. Let me pull your chart and see if one of the nurses can help you. I say, okay. And let me tell you, my heart's beating in my ears and I'm having a lot of trouble breathing. Finally, a lady comes on the phone. Hello, Heather. This is Mary. How can I help you? Well, I was wondering if you could call the school for me. Call the school? Why? Mr. Kahn, our vice principal, he's making me wear a bandage on my nose. There's a long silence on the other end of the phone, and for a minute I thought I was wrong. Finally, she says, a bandage? For a simple nosebleed? Why on earth? Well, that's all I needed. I started sniffling like I was trying not to cry. It's so embarrassing. He says I have to wear a bandage just in case it was broken or fractured or something. He says that if anything happens to it in PE, he doesn't want the school to be liable or something. I don't understand it. All I know is that all the kids are making fun of me, and I just want to die. Now Mary wants to get this straight. She takes a deep breath and says, You're telling me that your principal, what's his name? He's the vice principal, Mr. Kahn. Mr. Kahn insists that you wear a bandage on your nose because he doesn't want to be responsible if you get injured again? That's right. He made me put gauze and tape over the whole thing, and he says I can't take it off until Friday. What? Can you please just call the school and talk to him? Tell him it's not broken and that I'm fine, that it was just a little nosebleed, and I don't want to wear these stupid bandages. I most certainly will. I look up the school's number real quick and give it to her. Then I hang up the phone and race back to the lunch line to find Marissa. I grin at her and she whispers, Where'd you go? Heather's only a few people ahead of us, so I say, I'll tell you when we're sitting down. So we make it through the line, and we're just about to sit down at a table when the loudspeaker blares. Mr. Kahn, please come to the office for a telephone call. Mr. Kahn, to the office, please. I nudge Marissa and grin up at the loudspeaker, and she says, What did you do? So I tell her, and pretty soon she's got a hand in front of her mouth, and we're both giggling and peeking over at Heather a few tables away. A little while later, Mr. Kahn comes steaming into the cafeteria. I kick Marissa under the table and say, It's showtime. Now, Mr. Kahn was probably supposed to take Heather to his office and straighten things out with her there, but he didn't. He found her and stood towering over her, yelling, What do you think you're trying to pull? Take that ridiculous tape off your face right now. Heather sputters, But Mr. Kahn, the doctor says... Mr. Kahn's looking like he's ready to kill her. Yes, I know what the doctor says. I just had a very enlightening conversation with Dr. Grant. I've spent the last 10 minutes listening to him read me the riot act about how I've been forcing you to wear a bandage on your nose. I ask you again, Miss Acosta, what are you trying to pull here? Why are you wearing that ridiculous bandage when all you had was a simple nosebleed? By now, the whole cafeteria is quiet. And I mean quiet. No one's even breathing. Heather turns as red as her hair. But, take it off right now. All of it. Pretty soon, all the kids are whispering and moving in, trying to get a closer look at Heather peeling athletic tape off her face. And when all the tape's off her snotty little nose, Mr. Kahn says very quietly, Come with me. I don't want to miss a minute of this, so I say to Marissa, Come on. And we start following them outside. But Heather forgot her purse, and when she goes racing back to the chair to get it, who does she see? Me. All I do is give her a little smile, but it's enough to make her figure out that I had something to do with the trouble she's in. She comes after me saying, You little... And pretty soon she's all over me, trying to scratch my eyes out. Mr. Kahn comes racing back, and while he's trying to pull her off me, Heather tries to punch me in the face. It was probably the first punch she'd ever thrown. It just didn't have much experience behind it, if you know what I mean. Instead of coming straight at me, it came around from the side. And since I could see it coming a mile away, what did I do? I duck. And who does she hit? Mr. Kahn. Now, I don't think it hurt him too much, but I do think it was like poking an angry bear with a fishing pole. Mr. Kahn practically drags Heather out of the cafeteria, and pretty soon everyone's coming up to me telling me, Way to go, and stuff like that. Then Danny Urbanski says, Hey, what happened to all that money they were collecting for Heather? And that starts everyone else saying, Hey, that's right. Where's my money? I want my money back. And there's Tanil standing in the middle of the pack with her eyes darting around, looking for a way to escape the cafeteria before she gets mugged. but it's too late. Somebody sees her and calls, "Hey, Tanil, get back here. We won our money. Where is it?" Tanil's smile is as sweet as vinegar. "Heather has it. Really?" Then she starts blubbering. "Oh, come on, you guys. She made me do it. I didn't know. How was I supposed to know?" I call over to her. "Oh, yeah, right. I bet you want everybody to believe you didn't know she pricked me in the rear end with that stupid pin either." Before Tanil can stop herself, she says, "Oh, she told me that. She just never told me her nose wasn't broken. Honest." I give her a little smile, and all of a sudden she realizes what she's done. She says, "No, wait, that's not how it happened." But everybody's already shaking their heads and leaving. Then Danny Urbanski comes up to me and says, "I'm glad you punched her. She deserved it." Marissa grabs my arm. "Did you hear that? Can you believe it? Danny said he was glad you punched her." She pumps her hand in the air. "Yes." Kathleen Spencer was the office aide when Heather's mom showed up to have a meeting with Mr. Kahn, and she said you could hear Mr. Kahn's voice clear through the door and all the way down the hall. She also said that Heather spent the whole time before her mother showed up in the box, and that after the Acostas left, the secretaries went crazy whispering about how Heather should have been suspended, or how Heather had been suspended for 3 days. They said they couldn't remember anyone being suspended for 3 days, let alone a girl. When I got back to homeroom at the end of the day, sure enough, Heather was missing. Marissa comes running up to me saying, "Have you heard?" And pretty soon everyone's running up to me saying, "Have you heard?" and telling me they never believed her in the first place. Right. On our way home from school, Marissa says, "You want to get an ice cream?" I say, "Sure." And when we get near the mall, she points and says, "There's Oscar." So we race across Broadway, and when we get close, we start slapping our feet on the sidewalk and making a bunch of noise. "Hi, Oscar." He stops and cups his ear, so Marissa calls, "2 double dynamos, please." He smiles and nods, and pretty soon, chinga, 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 he makes us change, and we've got our drumsticks. Now, Marissa wants to sit right down in the grass and start on hers, but I say, "Come on, I want to show you something." So we take our cones and go inside the mall. And as I'm taking her up the escalator, she says, "Where are we going?" I just smile and lead her over to the employees-only door. Then I latch onto her wrist and drag her inside. She whispers, "Sammy, no. What are you doing? Isn't this against the law or something?" I keep on dragging. "Come on, I know what I'm doing." That doesn't do much to convince her, but she comes along anyway. When we get to the door of the roof, she peeks around it like she's checking a stall in the girls' room. "Are you sure this is okay?" I disappear around the corner, and she comes charging after me. And when she gets on the roof, her eyes bug out, and she says, "Wow, this is cool." I take her over to one side and say, "Look, you can see St. Mary's and the Salvation Army," and then I tell her about everything I've seen when I was up here before, and how you can see so much more with binoculars. She says, "Check it out. You don't even need binoculars. This is awesome." So we run around the roof of the mall shouting at each other, "Look, look," until Marissa says, I'll bet I can see my house from up here." "I'll bet you can't. There are way too many trees in the way," which is true. East Jasmine is like buried in trees. They probably have enough trees there to start a forest. She looks, but she can't see it, and then all of a sudden she looks down at her drumstick and says, "Ooh, yuck, this thing's melting all over me." Both our double dynamos are oozing out of the wrappers, dripping all over us. So we sit down and slurp like crazy until we've got them under control. And we're sitting there kind of roasting in the sun, licking away on our drumsticks, when Marissa says, "Do you think Danny's cute?" I work on my drumstick some more. "Yeah, he's cute, but he ought to lose the ring." Marissa sits up a bit. "Lose the ring? The ring's cool." Then she goes on and on about him wearing his ring on his index finger of his left hand. It's so significant, and how if he ever gave it to a girl, it would mean something. And you can tell she spent hours thinking about Danny Urbanski's ring, and why he wears it, where he wears it, and what it would mean if he gave it to her. I laugh and I say, "He only wears it on that finger because it fits there." And we spend about another 10 minutes talking about Danny Urbanski's ring. Finally, she takes the last bite of drumstick and says, "You don't like him, do you?" "Like him? No. I'd never even thought about liking him. I mean, I've known for a long time that Marissa liked him, so what in the world would I be doing liking him? She laughs and gives me her trash. Want to go down to the arcade for a few minutes? I think about the 12 cents I've got left in my pocket. Nah, I better get home. I want to tell Grams about what happened with Heather today. So off we go down the stairs, and when we get back into the mall, Marissa goes one way and I go the other. And I'm in the middle of putting our napkins and wrappers in the trash when a shiver runs down my back. I stand there a minute with my hands halfway in the trash can. Then I pull the napkins back out and sit down right there on the floor. And the longer I stare at the napkins, the colder I feel, until my whole body is shivering. I whisper, "No, it can't be." But Hudson's voice keeps echoing through my brain. "My dear, things are not always what they appear." And the more I think about it, the more I know. I know who the hotel thief is. And that's the end of chapter 16. We'll be back next week for the end of Sammy Keyes and the Hotel Thief. Do you know who the hotel thief is?